meeting to order. Good morning. Welcome to meeting number 114 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs. Conformément à l'article 108
Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, January 29, 2024, the committee is resuming its study on the experience of Indigenous veterans and Black veterans.
Noir. La réunion d'aujourd'hui.
Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format, and I would like to remind you that all comments must be addressed to the chair.
The witnesses are from the Canadian Aboriginal Veterans and Serving Members Association. We have Mr. Richard Blackwolf, National President. Welcome. From the Veterans Association Food Bank, we have Mrs. Mary Blackburn, Executive Director, and Tommy Wayne Benjamin, Store Clerk, Veteran Association Thrift Store. So, welcome you once again, and you will have 5 minutes for your opening statement, and after that, members of the committee will be asked you some questions. So, I'm going to start with you, Mr. Blackwolf. You can start for 5 minutes, please.
I'll put it underneath here. Good morning, Chairman Dubourg and honorable members of the committee. Thank you for your invitation to appear before you and make submissions on Indigenous veterans' experiences. My name is Richard Blackwolf. I am the National President of the Canadian Aboriginal Veterans and Serving Members Association. I am Métis veteran of the Cold War era, having joined the Royal Canadian Navy in 1959. Serving for a combination of 38 years in the Navy and the Department of National Defense. Canadian Aboriginal Veterans and Serving Members Association is incorporated and functions as a nationwide Indigenous veterans advocate for the past 54 years. This year, 2024, marks the 212th year Indigenous men and women have voluntarily enlisted to serve in the Armed Forces of Canada. For time, I will move ahead. Information quest, to gather information on our veterans' experience, both in the armed forces and after being released from the armed forces. We sent out 2,000 requests for their personal experience. In summary, transition to civilian life, Indigenous service personnel retiring after a full career with a pension and good health have experienced the least problems transitioning to civilian life as expected. Indigenous personnel who are forced to leave the military early in their career, largely because of medical problems, have experienced the most problems transitioning to civilian life. These are summaries of the many hundreds that we've received. A soldier reported she was forced to leave the Army because of PTSD. She received mental health treatment while in the Army, and after she was released, she received no mental health support from Veterans Affairs. With 2 young children to support, her need for mental health stability for employment is of the utmost importance, creating an immediate need for her to receive the appropriate mental health treatments. We have advised her to contact the Veteran Ombud for help in obtaining Veteran Affairs assistance. Veterans Affairs, Veterans Housing Summary. Indigenous veterans returning to their First Nations reserve have experienced the least problems in housing. Indigenous veterans forced to leave the military, being discharged mainly for health reasons, and have no reserve to return to and have no likelihood of employment are at the highest risk of becoming homeless and drug addicted in urban centers. Shelters and food bank summary. Our national website is currently being rebuilt after an 11-year run of 1.3 million visitors. The Veterans Service page will provide Indigenous veterans with their families with comprehensive listing of shelters, health clinics, food banks available in the provinces and territories. Veterans Affairs summary. The most frequent complaints received from Indigenous veterans rise from the disconnect between Veterans Affairs invitation to open an account and make application for disabilities benefits, which appears on their webpage. Then, to find their applications being subject to delay and deny discouragement tactics. Indigenous veterans with health and mental health issues' sense of personal integrity can be severely impacted by the experience of feeling disbelieved, essentially being called a liar by the Veterans Affairs when they receive denied entitlement ruling letters. We consider this standard practice, denial of entitlement ruling on the first applications for disability benefits, to be a deliberate breach of the Veterans Affairs Veterans Bill of Rights, to be treated with respect, dignity, and fairness. In my own experience of sending a Veterans Affairs application for disability pensions, hearing loss, tinnitus, the first resolve is the same thing. Disability decision, we regret to inform you that you have been denied entitlement for hearing loss and tinnitus. 2 years later, it's the other way around. You have to wait. Took 2 years. Hearing loss entitlement granted. 5/5 hearing for tinnitus and hearing. Summary. 2015 stakeholders meeting held in the Citadel at Quebec City was considered the best and gave us cause to believe there would be positive changes at Veterans Affairs. The main cause for delay in the processing of applications for disability benefits cited by Veterans Affairs was the interface delay in the progress documents between D&D records and Veterans Affairs. The delay was caused by the Privacy Act. The CAV made 2 proposals to expedite the transfer of records from D&D to Veterans Affairs, an amendment to the Privacy Act, and on the second proposal was for the Minister of Veterans Affairs. It was also to also be the Deputy Minister of National Defense.
Mr. Blackwolf, I know that you're not finished yet, but members of the committee will ask you questions so you can go further in your testimony.
In that case, I will say my last words to the committee.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honorable members of the committee, thank you for your generous attention. Merci. Miigwech.
Merci beaucoup, merci. Et là, nous allons passer à Madame Mary Black.
Thank you very much. Now we'll go for Madame Mary Blackburn for 5 minutes.
You never know. So I'm Marie Blackburn. I'm the Executive Director for the Veterans Association Food Bank in Calgary. And I want to thank all of you for your invitation to have us here today. This is such an important thing. It is always good when we can work together to improve the quality of life for our veterans. I'd started the Veterans Association, as there's many veterans out there that don't have access to Veterans Affairs because they weren't medically injured during their time of service, so we kind of fill that gap in for other people. And our goal is simply to prevent homelessness, hunger, isolation, and ultimately veteran suicide. So when you have those first three sort of in place, you kind of give people hope for the rest. When I was asked to participate, I was happy to contribute information that can hopefully be a learning experience for all involved. In my past 6 years of assisting veterans, I have heard stories from Indigenous veterans particularly that are disturbing and very sad. I had a woman veteran that required shelter after her house had burnt down. The Veterans Affairs worker, we usually call them first to see if they can help with some of the assistance. And she said to me, she said, well, I can't give her the money directly because, you know, they just drink it away. And I said, is that because she's Indigenous? And she said, well, yes, that's the way it is. I said, well, I happen to be Indigenous too, and I don't have the same sentiments as you. When I encouraged the woman to talk to Veterans Affairs, she was so terrified to report anything because she didn't want to lose the benefits that she had. So, you know, in my confidence to her, I'm not allowed to say anything, but things like that are happening quite frequently, whether you're Indigenous or not. If there's something that's happening between a worker and a client, they're just not reporting it because they're afraid of losing things. So then my other little story was a little bit worse. I was told by another lady veteran who served in Afghanistan and is pretty highly decorated, and she needed help with a back claim injury. And the Veterans Affairs worker said to her, well, if you can lay on your back to get pregnant, perhaps your claim isn't all that valid. I've had Indigenous veterans who have never had a claim generated because they were told they were not eligible, even though they clearly were. I've been told once they have transitioned out, they felt that they've had no support from Veterans Affairs, for whatever reasons. Our organization has built positive and strong relations with Veterans Affairs that is now addressing claims for our Indigenous veterans. It may not seem like many, but to date we've helped out 8 to 10 veterans who over the past 15 to 20 years have been told that they weren't eligible for benefits or were too scared after the first denial to try to do anything different. We know that those numbers will grow, that they now have a safe place that they can trust, that we will at least advocate for them and hope that they can get the benefits that they're entitled to. I do believe since we have taught so many people about truth and reconciliation, it has opened the doors for people to be more kind and understanding, and opening a door where they can actually come to us. Tommy's a big advocate for what we do. And these Indigenous veterans will now start getting some of the benefits that they've been entitled to for many, many years but been denied.
Mr. Benjamin.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Tommy Benjamin. I'm originally from Old Crow, Yukon Territory. I live in Calgary, Alberta. I'm a Gwich'in veteran. In 1982, I enlisted in the Canadian Armed Forces. My basic training was in Canadian Forces Base Cornwallis, Nova Scotia. At that time, there was a large number of recruits from across the Arctic and High Arctic that were a part of CFB Cornwallis training. At that time, we were also known as Indians and Eskimos. We're now known as First Nations. So I'll use that term in my presentation. The training staff immediately began to weed the First Nations recruits out of the ranks. The word now, I believe, is systemic racism. I was assaulted at 2:30 a.m. in the morning by training staff. I was grabbed by my ankle and thrown to the floor from the top bunk I was assigned to, and I was asleep at the time. Today I have back problems. I have concussion issues at the time. I still managed to serve with those conditions. One by one, the First Nation recruits that were breaking down, and some of them were crying because they were unfairly picked on. And for the Inuit recruits, their last names were being mocked by the training staff during this time. So racism and discrimination continued throughout my time in the military. I left the military early because of the abuse that I was serving under, the abuse that was happening to me and my fellow First Nations recruits and members of the Canadian Armed Forces. And for my transition out of the military, I had a lot of difficulties. I still do today. I had a lot of difficulties with alcoholism and drug addiction. Not to mention anxiety, social anxiety, a history of homelessness, unemployment, poverty. The list could go on forever. I experienced it. I lived it. So 2007, as part of a clinic that First Nations people go to in Calgary, they sent me to for a diagnosis, and within half an hour, the results came back that I was chronic complex post-traumatic stress disorder from my experience in the military. So during that, if there was no such word as transition out of the military when I served, and so I had a lot of difficulties with transferring out of the military, because I always say that my mom didn't get the same person back that she sent to the military. So today I have to say that this is my 5th time applying for benefits with Veterans Association Food Bank in Calgary, with their Veterans Association setup, and with David J. Thompson, who's the Aboriginal Liaison Engagement Officer, who reviewed my file and said that I should have been on benefits in 2015, and I'm still in the process of applying for benefits, and I pray that I will get it, because at this point I'm on what is called in the province of Alberta AISH, short income for severely handicapped, that my doctor put me on. So that in itself, I believe, is my presentation. I thank you for your attention. And Ottawa is a beautiful city. My first time here. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Mr. Benjamin. I hope that you will take the time to visit the city also. And also thank you for your courage to be able to share your story with us today. It's really important for members of the committee. So now we're going to start the first round of questions and answers. Yeah, and start with the Vice Chair of the committee, Mr. Blake Richards, for 6 minutes, please.
Sure, thank you. First of all, Mr. Blackwolf, Mr. Benjamin, thank you for your service to our country, and thank you to all three of you for your service to your fellow veterans. Mr. Blackwolf referenced the Triple D policy that we often hear about from veterans.
Yeah, or do we have to?
Can you?
How do you stick that?
From the top.
From the top
Sure.
and it's back.
Sure. So the question I have is for you, Marie. But Mr. Blackwolf did mention the triple D policy that we often hear about from veterans. He mentioned it as delay, deny, discouragement. I kind of like that because usually we hear it as delay, deny, die. And you know, Mr. Benjamin, you're experiencing delays. Obviously, you're you know, and I got to tell you, the stories that we heard from you are completely unacceptable as to what happened to you, Marie. The stories that you heard of what VAC caseworkers told the individuals you talked about, completely unacceptable. But thank you for sharing them with us because we need to know those things. But Marie, I wanted you to, you told me a story when I visited with you recently that really illustrates the delay, deny, die, triple D policy. Would you mind sharing that with this committee for the benefit of everyone?
Yes, I can. So it was a hot summer day last year, and the air conditioning went out in the building, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to scoot out of here early and go home and have some gin and tonics on my decks and just cool down. But I'd seen this car in the parking lot all day long. He'd come, he'd go, and then he was just sitting there. So when I was leaving, he came and tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, "Are you able to help me?" And I said, "What is it you need?" And you could tell he was very stressed out and nervous because I just need some help with some family bills. So we went back into that sweltering hot building, and we did the intake on him, and he just needed to pay his mortgage. He had no food for his family. He was behind on all of his bills. And I said, "It's not a problem. We can pay all of that for you." So off he went, off I went, and then he called me about 2 months later, and he thanked me because his family unit was back together. His wife and him had sorted out things. The kids were back in their soccer games, whatever the case may be. And he said to me, he said, "I just want you to know that would have been my last day on earth had you not helped me." He said, "Because I had a gun under my seat, and if you had said no, I would have blown out my brains in your parking lot." So this is just another example of how long people are waiting to get these benefits that they're eligible for. And it's ridiculous, really. And it is, and that's why we say in our mandate is to ultimately prevent veteran suicide. So we are sort of the go-between Veterans Affairs and the client to make sure that we can pay their bills, or we can help with their kids, or we can put food on their table. Waiting for these benefits for as long as they have to sometimes, I don't know how you fix it, but something like this committee, might give you a better understanding of what we go through as boots on the grounds to figure this out.
Well, thank God for you and the Veterans Association Food Bank, not just for that situation, but for I know many others like it. The fact that you're there is something that I know I'm sure we all appreciate, but you shouldn't have to be there. It should never get to where they need to come to you with the thoughts that veteran had because they couldn't get what they needed. And Tommy talked about his situation. It's the same kind of a thing. He's waiting for stuff that is owed to him, and it should never be the case, and it needs to be fixed. So thank you for sharing that with the committee. I guess I'll kind of just broaden things out a little bit here. Marie, I'll stick with you on this. We're hearing from food banks that serve veterans all across the country and, sort of seeing massive increases over the last several years. The cost of living crisis and everything else. I've heard 4 or 5 times increases in terms of the need for services at some food banks. Can you tell us a little bit about the situation that you've experienced in Calgary and what kind of demand there's been on your services?
Oh, it's literally been astronomical. Like our rental increases in Calgary are just ridiculous. The rents are going from, say, $1,500 a month with raises anywhere from $600 to $1,000 a month extra. So our veterans, from September we'll just say the whole year, we've had 38 veterans that we've actually physically housed in hotels till we can find them another place. And that's not always so easy because if they're paying $1,500 a month here and they're evicted because the landlord has raised the rent $500, you're not going to find another place for $1,500. They just don't exist. So we kind of calculated out one stay for a veteran in a hotel for 3 months. It's about the average till we can get them situated, is about $10,000. Then on top of that, when they move, they have to have furniture, clothing, food, whatever. And just our general people coming to use the food bank, like in Edmonton, for example, there's over 200 veterans that access the Veterans Food Bank every month. Ours is around 100. We have offices in Grand Prairie and Lethbridge, and there are around 50 people in those smaller communities. Just everything, like we pay people's rents if they can't afford it. We now are subsidizing rents because it's almost cheaper to subsidize a rent than to remove them and place them into a hotel somewhere. So our numbers over a 6-month period literally tripled in the amount of money we're spending on keeping veterans housed, clothed, fed, and in their homes. So it's just like that everywhere. And we have every day people from just the community asking us, can you help us? We need food. But we can't because we only service our military veterans. But Blake, it's sad. It's sad what's happening to our veteran community.
It really is, but we're so thankful that organizations like yours exist. And I know, I guess I just close with this. I know for you, what would success look like?
Somebody asked me that a while ago, and I said if I didn't have to have keys for the store anymore, where I could just shut the whole thing down and walk away. But that's not the reality. We have to have those doors open, and we're on call 24/7. We have veterans that call and they're having a tough time and thinking their only way out is that suicide route. And just stabilize them till morning or go and sit with them till 6 in the morning, whatever the case may be. So I just started this sort of on a whim and had no idea that it would be this big.
Thank you.
Just hopefully we don't keep seeing a trend in this. We'd like to level it out a bit, and success would be shutting the doors forever.
Thank you, Mrs. Blackburn. And now let's go to, I'd like to welcome, I forgot to welcome one of our colleagues, Mr. Wayne Long, to the committee. Thank you. And now for 6 minutes, Miss Lisa Hefner. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I would also like to thank all of our witnesses for your testimony today. Mr. Benjamin, I want to echo my colleague and thanking you for your bravery in coming here to share your story. It's really hard to hear. I can't imagine having gone through it. But it's important that we have that on the record here in Parliament today, and we couldn't do that if you didn't have the strength to come here and share that story. So once again, thank you. And Ms. Blackburn, also thank you for the work that you're doing. These things are hard to hear. They're really hard to hear. What our committee is trying to get at is good recommendations and ways to move forward. You've talked a bit about how you've been able to fill some of the gaps and help guide veterans to the services that they're entitled to. Could you explain that a bit more for us and perhaps give us some suggestions as how we can be better at helping veterans as soon as they leave the military access whatever benefits they're entitled to?
Well, I think for veterans that are leaving the service now, we've heard from different organizations, like from different veterans, that some of the people helping them are fantastic at getting them all the services that they need. For example, we had one that served 38 years and he's using my food bank. Like, why is that happening? So we advocate for them. We're that go-between where, like when he asked, do I have any benefits when I leave? Like, no, you're good. You got your pension. But us making sure that every veteran that comes through that door, whether it's for food services, the Pet Promise Program, the emergency funding program, the first thing we do is fill out that back paperwork. And we've had quite a good success rate lately because of the relationships we've built with Veterans Affairs. So that is the number one thing that we do. I think from my comments that I made, better education of don't be discriminatory to anybody. Doesn't matter if you're Indigenous or green or yellow, who cares? I think there has to be more in the lines of teaching people that these men and women signed on the dotted line to save us and to protect us. So you have a job because they've done this for you. I think that really, really pushing that their service is that valuable in the lives that you all live. I think that's something that Veterans Affairs could really focus on.
That's helpful. Thank you. Recently, our government created a Veterans Organizations Emergency Support Fund, $20 million, and I believe your organization got some funding from that. Can you tell us about the impact of that funding and, you know, it broader, if you'd like to see it continue? How did it all work? How did you use it?
So we got the emergency funding in July, and we haven't even advertised. All I did, so we are now responsible, well, not responsible, we are now able to go through Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and BC, and then also support Alberta. I took one trip out to BC, and within an hour I had 17 new clients, and that's not even advertising anything. You know, and they're younger veterans. They're ones that are serving that are going to be losing their homes because the money isn't there for them to pay for everything. We will absolutely run out of our funding before March 1st. We've asked the government, what happens when that happens? Like, I can't raise, we do pretty good on fundraising, but I wouldn't be able to fundraise enough to support all those provinces. So I think that we've asked what happens then, and they said that's something that they would, if the program is really successful, they said they would continue that funding, which would be amazing because it's like, one day in Manitoba, I had 7 referrals in one day because of Veterans Affairs workers knowing that we have this money now available to help the veterans. So it's been a godsend for sure.
So perhaps a good recommendation for this report would be to increase and extend that funding even further.
Absolutely.
I understand you've also been part of the Canada Summer Jobs program. We were just speaking about that this morning. It's the summer program where the government will fund certain summer students to come and work in your organization. Have you done that for many years? What's the impact of that program?
We've done it for 3 years. This year I had to navigate my way through the paperwork, which was not a lot of fun, but we did it. And the people, it's amazing to have summer they're not students, they're just summer jobs. Come and just learn and embrace what veterans have done for them and their families and all of the country. So it's been super beneficial. It's given them a lot of training and new skills to move forward. So we've been very, very pleased with the summer program job.
Just about 30 seconds left, so if you or Mr. Benjamin have any final thoughts or recommendations in how you see your situations could be improved with recommendations coming from this committee.
I like the fact that the Veterans Affairs Canada has Aboriginal liaison engagement officers. Yes. I like that because it takes away I want to say the paperwork, but more or less it takes away the stress of having to apply and the disappointment of being turned down because I may have done something or left something out or maybe I'm not aware of the process. So I'm a strong advocate myself for having the liaison engagement officers. So good on the I want to say the department. Good on Veterans Affairs for having those positions. And I agree with their assistance altogether. I wouldn't have been able to access more of some of the programs that are available if it wasn't for these liaison officers. So I give thanks for that. Thank you.
That's an excellent recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hefner. Et maintenant,
now we will go to the second vice chair of this committee. Not Mr. Luc Desilets. Not Antoine. Antoine will be the father, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello to all of my colleagues. Thank you for your service, Mr. Benjamin. Your testimony was very touching and also causes a lot of concern and raised a lot of questions. Mr. Chair, I would like to move a motion. I was thinking that I would do this in the upcoming days, but I think the context is right at this point in time. So the motion will be the following, that the committee undertake a study on the prevention of suicide in the veterans community, that this study include 4 meetings of 2 hours, and that the committee table, according to Standing Order 109, its report to the government, and that the government provide an answer. And the committee should undertake this study as soon as this current study on experience of Indigenous veterans and Black veterans is finished. And I'm going to very quickly explain. I don't want to take up too much time with this, but just to give you some numbers. But in the meantime, there's a point of order from our colleague.
Okay. You want to speak to this? Okay. Please go.
Juste quelques arguments, encore une fois.
So just a couple of numbers as background. So 2017 to 2022, there were 54 suicides that were dog captured. And without going too much into the detail, we are looking at 50% more suicides in male veterans. In young veterans, we are looking at 250% more suicides compared to general population. In women veterans, we are looking at 150% more suicides than in general population. So I've obtained these numbers recently, and I just wanted to make the point on these. So if there are questions from my colleagues, but I just wanted to move that motion to the attention of our clerk. So this is motion on the floor. I don't know if Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just want to confirm some logistics here before I move on. We don't have additional witnesses coming in the second hour. Am I correct? Okay. No. What I would like to suggest is we have witnesses in front of us. We have time later to speak at length about the order of different meetings or the content of a motion. My recommendation, and I hope everyone will agree, that we return to the witnesses and come back to this motion in the second hour.
Okay. First of all, by the time that Mr. Desilets was talking, so I stopped the time because we said we have 1 hour with the witnesses, so I'd like to stay with 1 hour. But the second part that you're talking about, it should go on committee business, so we should look at the members of the committee if they are agree on. And Mr. Richards,
I would agree that that's the way we should proceed. I would just encourage that we have 2 rounds of questioning with the witnesses and then move to that. So I'd be agreed with that.
Agreed. Perfect. Great. So, Mr. Desilets.
Mr. Benjamin, would you be able to identify the main problems that Indigenous veterans are facing today?
I think one of the biggest problem is the denial of benefits. Like, that's the most common thing that we see with our veteran or with our Indigenous veteran community is just, first of all, accepting the fact that they're a veteran, because a lot of them have been told that you're not really like one of us. The second part is getting them in the door to get the paperwork filled out. And with the help of Blake, trying to fast track some of this stuff, or having people within Veterans Affairs that understand that these guys have gone long enough without stuff. That's sort of the main thing that they're kind of having to navigate through. So.
Pouvez-vous juste m'expliquer ce que vous voulez?
What do you mean by denial?
We've had many Indigenous veterans, when they've applied for service, they say that there's no record of injuries or whatever, or that their mental health is not attributed to their veteran service. Well, you can clearly see, Tommy can tell you enough stories about that, and so have our veteran community told us that. That's the denial part of things, is that they basically say, well, we're not sure that you're even telling us the truth. Like, is this made up? So, but that happens with all veterans. Like, I shouldn't say all veterans, quite a few veterans have had the same thing told to them as well, that we don't believe your story. Are you sure that's how it really happened? But there's documentation that it did. So that's sort of the struggle that we're going through. And it's just the time delays on everything.
If I might interject, I'm in the process again, the 5th time of applying for benefits. And on my fourth attempt to apply to benefits through Veterans Affairs Canada, I was told that they have no record of me serving in the Canadian Armed Forces. And my file has now gone to the National Archives, and basically they couldn't help me anymore, and they told me goodbye. So those are some of the obstacles that I face. 5 times is a significant number of attempts to apply for benefits. I mean, it's a frustrating process. I mean, how can I explain to anyone that I did serve in the Canadian Armed Forces? And then Veterans Affairs Canada tells me that I didn't. So who am I? Am I a non-person? Did I serve in the military? Of course I did. And I'm very proud of that fact. And I will serve my country again under different circumstances. I do love my country. So, yes.
Ces 5 demandes-là, monsieur.
So these 5 times that you applied, did they all focus on the same thing? Were you applying for the same thing all those 5 times? And when did you make the first application?
I would probably have to say in 2005. I believe post-traumatic stress disorder was on top of the application for benefits. And those 5 times that I applied, it was post-traumatic stress disorder and injuries I received in the military. So basically it was pretty much the same conditions to apply for benefits. I can't say that there was any deviations as far as injuries and conditions. So yes, I would say it was pretty much the same thing when I applied each time.
Est-ce que vous diriez que ce que...
Would you say that what you have experienced with these 5 times 5 applications is something that's somewhat generalized amongst your colleagues, amongst Indigenous veterans?
In all honesty, I would have to say yes. Yes.
Avez-vous l'impression...
Do you feel that you're experiencing racism in terms of how you have been treated by the government?
Going to have to say and be honest, and I would have to say I'm not experiencing racism by my application. Not so much in comparison to my service in the Canadian Armed Forces, which are two different things. So if there is racism, I may not have experienced it, or possibly I'm not aware of it.
Encore, non? Merci infiniment pour.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Desilets.
Let's go to Miss Rachel Blaney for 6 minutes, please. Ms. Blaney.
Well, thank you so much, and I want to thank the members here who are our witnesses. Thank you for your service to our country, and thank you for your service to our veterans. I really deeply appreciate it. I'm going to come to you first, Mr. Benjamin, because I'm really compelled by your story, and unfortunately, I've heard similar realities of people from different ethnic backgrounds and Indigenous backgrounds that are facing significant discrimination and racism during their service time, and the lack of speed to really respond to that. So I'm just wondering if you could just explain a few things to me. And I also want to start by apologizing, because I feel like one of the hardest parts of doing this work is that we actually ask people to come to this place and tell their personal stories and basically bleed in front of us so that we can prove that it's really happening. So I just want to apologize that that's where we're at and that that's what the system requires. And I also just want to say, if you feel uncomfortable, please just let us know that. So you said you started your service in 1982, and I'm just wondering if you could share with the committee how long you served.
I served just possibly a few days, less than 2 years.
Thank you, that helps. And so part of the reason that you left, it sounded to me very much, was based on what you were seeing. You talked about seeing Inuit people that were there serving, and their last names were being mocked, and a lot of the abuse was really profound. I'm just wondering if you could share an example of what you witnessed or experienced during your service that really was painful in terms of racism.
One incident still haunts me to this day, because I use the word weed out because it's a military term that is used to eliminate people within the ranks, I believe, in any armed forces across the world. So one individual still haunts me to this day, and I use that word compassionately, because they went after him. His name is, I remember his first name is Thomas, and he was from Kuujjuaq, I believe. And they were unmerciful to him, to all of us that were at that time we were known as Indians and Eskimos. So this poor guy came to me and he cried to me, and I couldn't help him because I couldn't help myself as to what was going on. And this was just happening one by one to all the Indian and Inuit veterans that were serving. And I always say that 1982 was the year that Canada's Constitution was repatriated back to Canada, and there was a sense of, for me, it was a sense of duty to serve my country. And you can't serve your country with a criminal record. And I didn't have a criminal record when I went in the military, but I sure got one when I came out. You know, so I wasn't that same person I was when I went in. And to some extent, I'm not that same person I am today. But that doesn't mean I'm going to lay down and give up. I struggle at times. I'm coming back all the time. And one of the reasons that I could say I'm doing better is because of this person here with her organization. So she's helped me a lot, and countless other veterans, non-Aboriginal. You know, it's a brotherhood and a sisterhood when we get together after the service. There's I guess a lot of forgiving, but there's probably not any forgetting. So that was my experience, and I can't deny it.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that. And I think it's really important because we recently did a study on women veterans, and we heard from a lot of women who left, and the reason they left was because they weren't getting the support. And so what you're telling me is that also the Indigenous component of veterans often faced multiple challenges that are not documented. Mm-hmm. And so trying to get that benefit that should be tied to it, because there's a different service that you did, and when you faced that service, it meant you also had to face extreme racism, and that's traumatizing, and that's not where you want to go to serve your country, not to be traumatized. So one of the other veterans that was Indigenous that was here earlier talked about the fact that VAC doesn't have a place to bring together all veterans who are Indigenous to talk and to come together and explain their experiences so that VAC can hear that feedback and really look at their services. I'm wondering if you feel that that would be something that would be a good decision for VAC to do.
Absolutely, yes, I agree. Yes. I'm sure there's going to be positives and negatives as in anything, but I would agree 101% to bring Aboriginal veterans, whether that's First Nations, Inuit, Métis, bring them together. There's always room to improve. Nothing is perfect. We can always make inroads and maybe even change some minds.
Thank you very much. We're going to do another round of questions for each party for a total of 15 minutes, and I ask members of the committee try to respect the time allowed, and I'm going to start with Mr. Richards for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Mr. Black-Wolf, you haven't had much opportunity with questions. I want to give you some opportunity here. I understand that your organization was not included in the veterans organizations that were listed as partners for the King Charles coronation medals. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about why you think your organization was overlooked there and how that made you feel.
Yes, well, that we became aware of that because people were phoning the office saying, why aren't we on the list of participating organizations? Well, so when I looked at the list, we weren't there. So in our view, that exclusion was, for us, it's a public humiliation to start with. And when we asked like who and why, the standard answer was the federal government had determined the list. So in our view, we were publicly humiliated by the federal government from participating in the King Charles Medal Program. Our veterans feel that the decision was to exclude the CAV is without cause or reason, and they also believe it was contrary to the rights to being treated fairly and with respect and dignity. The CAV's inclusion also severs the Indigenous veterans' long connection with the Crown. In our view, we have 212 years connection with the Crown. So we're very sensitive to anything that's viewed of that, which are very important to us. So those were the things. Now, I contacted a number of people and received letters back and forth, and it was always ending in the same thing. The federal government had determined the list. This list was set at 30,000 medals to be cast, and so we suggested first that yes, to respect that and to not change any of those mandates. We requested a letter of introduction to the Mint here in Ottawa, and we would buy our veteran or pay for our own veterans medals to quell the groundswell that was developing of people wanting to know we don't want roadblocks and things going up. So we're trying to avoid that kind of thing. So anyway, we haven't received anything other than the fact that the program's running for a year. But
yeah, I mean, I know you've indicated to me that you've reached out to a lot of different people. I know the Governor General, some of the ministers of the Trudeau government cabinet, the Mint, the Prime Minister's office. What's your ultimate feeling here? Where do you think the decision on this lies? Like, what could be done to fix this?
In every application, we've requested by who and why. And we've yet to receive an answer on by who and by why. We know it comes from the PMO, obviously. So, but we've never been requested.
Okay. So
never had that request answered.
Sure. So, I mean, you know, this government talks a lot about reconciliation, but the actions don't always line up with it. And I think it sounds to me like another example of the actions not lining up with the words.
Even reconciliation, you can't reconcile what has occurred. I think that's, okay. Yes, from our view, the past is the past. We don't dwell on it. The veterans, we look ahead. Okay. But we are guardians of the past. That's why we're sensitive about our connection with the Crown.
So with just a brief amount of time, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt you because you mentioned we're focused on the future, and I mean but you're guardians of the past, and I appreciate that very much. So what would have to be done? What would the Prime Minister's office have to do to make this right?
Well, I mean, we should be at least graced with by who made the decision and why. Now, it just didn't involve us. For some reason, the four main veterans organizations in Canada, in Canadian Aboriginal Veterans, the NATO Veterans of Canada, and the two Peacekeepers group, all four were out of the medal running. And all those presidents have sent letters, and in a lot of cases, they didn't even get an answer back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blackwolf. And now let's go to MP Brian May for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions are going to be directed to the food bank, but I think it's important to maybe just address that last exchange. I know that my colleague across the way likes to place everything at the feet of PMO, but the reality is, and I stand to be corrected on this, but I'm under the impression that the Governor General's office is responsible for these particular metals. And I don't want to get into a whole thing, but I think that's important to correct that record that the PMO, as far as I'm aware, did not determine these particular locations. So I think it's important, but I think very quickly, because I have a very short amount of time, and I do, most of my questions are.
I've had letters with the heads of those departments, Peter Mills, who is secretary, and yes, they administer it, but they don't make the decisions. In his letters, it clearly state the federal government made the decisions. That's the list. It's final. It's closed. And our requests were, well, who, by who, and why. And
well, I'll dig into this because I think this is an important distinction, and because I do think you should get a response. I do think that is appropriate. But my understanding, all of my involvement in organizing these medals to my constituents have all been through the Governor General. It's not through the PMO at all. So I do have to move on just quickly to Ms. Blackburn, and I want to just say to all of you, thank you so much for being here today. I can sense the frustration. I can sense the challenges that each of you are describing in your interventions. And Ms. Blackburn, I know that you received a commendation from Minister of Veterans Affairs in 2019 for the work that you do for veterans. And that has become very evident as to why you received that commendation here today, not just from your testimony, but from Mr. Benjamin's testimony as well. And so again, thank you for being here, and thank you for everything that you do for the veterans community. As somebody who, prior to politics, was in the nonprofit world myself, I had a lot of connection with folks in your line of work, if you will. And I know that during COVID-19, many nonprofit organizations and charitable organizations experienced an incredibly sudden and critical loss of fundraising revenues. And I'm wondering if maybe you could speak to that, and would that accurately describe your organization's experience through that time?
We didn't really suffer a significant loss in revenue coming in, because on the other side of the fence, we had so many veterans that were eligible for the COVID funding. So when you have that money coming in, you didn't really need to use the food bank. So we were kind of shocked when all this started happening. We thought we were just going to have lineups out the door, but it was actually, in fact, different. Nobody was really coming in. So we weren't really at a loss for money coming in, but because we weren't really giving out a lot of money either. So, but the toughest part of COVID for our veterans was the isolation component again. We'd worked really, really hard to get them out of those four corners, and now all of a sudden we've got them jammed back into four. So we had like 4 suicides during that time, which was heart-wrenching because we had worked so hard with these people, and there was just no resources for anybody at the time. But hopefully we never have another COVID incident, because it's...
I certainly agree with that. I hope none of us have to go through that again. I'm seeing I have a minute left, so very quickly, we know that partnerships out in the community can help lead to progress, and when we work together, we can accomplish more than if we work in silos. And I'm wondering if maybe you can speak to whether or not your organization works with other organizations, maybe like the Legion, to connect with the stakeholders that you support, and how is that working, and are there ways the federal government can help facilitate that?
Our relationship with Legion branches is amazing. We all work on the same page. Our command office isn't so lovable towards us, but that's okay. We work with a lot of recovery centers, treatment centers, mental health facilities. We get, like, we were doing a study one day that 86% of our money comes in from individual donors. but we're now working on working with bigger corporations to get those kind of funding models into place for our veterans. But most of it's within the veteran community. So we have like the mental health facilities and treatment centers, and we support them and they support us. So it's been very rewarding that way. And our Legion branches are amazing. They raise a lot of money and food for us, so we can't thank them enough for all the work that they do.
Thank you so much for everything that you all do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. May. Et maintenant,
And now, we are going to go to Mr. Luc Desilets for a brief 2.5 minutes. Ms. Blackburn, with everything that we have heard so far, you personally, with the experience you have, do you believe that there are two types of veterans when it comes to them being recognized by the department?
In some regards, yes. We have another veteran who is a black gentleman, and he's had many struggles with trying to navigate through that. So I think even if there's one, that's too many. But I can say that I have firsthand experience it, like even with Tommy and a few of our other veterans, where it's distinctly targeted that you are different than the rest of us, in their opinion. So, but not drastic, but it's there. And as long as it's there, it needs to stop.
Bon, à travers tout le Canada, il y a
Well, across Canada, there are around 27,000 veterans. Do you believe that the situation you have described is similar across the country, across Canada, where there could be particular problems in your province? I know that you work in different provinces, but maybe this would be a question for Mr. Benjamin.
I know for a fact it happens in every province because we've heard the stories from other people. When you have like a group of Indigenous people, they all talk, and those stories eventually filter back. Or we get calls from all across Canada saying, "Are you able to help me? I live in Newfoundland," or whatever. And this is some of the problems I've had with Veterans Affairs, not being able to get my paperwork stuff done. So, not rapidly, but it's out there.
If I can interject.
Yes, sir.
I would have to say that there is like problems with Indigenous veterans across Canada as a whole, because I'm not an isolated case. It happens all across the country. You hear those stories. But I also want to say too as well that for the Indigenous community, no matter who you are, it's an honor to serve our country. It's it's almost like carrying a badge. But at the same time, yes, there are difficulties for veterans across Canada.
Merci beaucoup.
merci, Monsieur Desilets.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Desilets.
2.5 minutes, please.
So I'd just like to start by moving a motion, and I move that the committee write a letter drawing the minister's attention to the urgency of Mr. Benjamin's case and look into his benefits. I'm hoping that everybody will support me in that.
Okay. Everyone heard that motions? Great. So you can bring that after.
You bring it at the second hour?
Yes.
Okay, I can do
Okay,
that, but
please.
I'll work on that for you, sir. I do want to say that I will always carry with me these two things that you said today, Mr. Benjamin. My mom told me that she did not get the same person back that she sent, and that I couldn't help the others because I couldn't help myself. Thank you for that. I will carry it. It will be my honor to carry it. But I do want to come to you, Ms. Blackburn, and just ask you a question. You testified earlier that when you spoke to a veterans, a VAC worker, a Veterans Affairs worker, that they actually referenced that Indigenous people are more likely to be alcoholics. I just want to make sure that I got that clear and I wasn't confused. And that you've heard other things that were similar around sort of Indigenous racism. So I'm just wondering, when you hear that happen, is there any process for you to make complaints, or have you ever had anyone from VAC reach out and want to understand what happened better so that they could look at their service delivery practices?
Well, like I said with the First Lady there, she absolutely didn't want to put in a complaint because she was too afraid she'd lose her benefits. But I did recommend that she ask for a new caseworker, and she could explain it to Veterans Affairs themselves. The second one, same thing. They don't want to get involved with causing any grief between them and their workers because these women have children. They have to have these incomes coming in, and they just don't want to lose their benefits on any regard. We have called out, I know, our 2 caseworkers. We just had a gentleman that spent 32 years with, like I said earlier, without any benefits leaving the military. And we have reported her for just miscommunication. Well, we call it miscommunication, but inappropriate behavior with this veteran. And so we had his permission to carry on and put in a complaint. So that's in the works right now. But most of them don't want to say anything because of their fear of losing benefits. And that's the biggest thing.
And so as an advocate, are you able to, is there any systems that VAC has made you aware of that you could say, I'm not going to identify people, but we've heard similar things like this, and we would like you to address it?
We have one gentleman who works for Veterans Affairs, and we do tell him the situation. But once again, we're under the confidence of the client not to have it reported. So, but he's aware of the things sometimes that we go through, and he'll give us recommendations to say, well, you know, you absolutely have to report this, whether the client wants you to or not, but we never have, because our basis is still with the client.
You don't want to break trust. That's right.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Question period is over, but we have a comment from Mrs. Wagenthal.
I appreciate it, Chair. Thank you. This will just take 30 seconds in light of only having the 1 hour instead of a longer time with these people with great feedback. But I just want to ask, Mr. Blackwolf, you spoke of an advisory group you were part of and 2 recommendations that you made, one in regard to adjusting the Privacy Act so that veterans' files could be more readily available at VAC. And then you also talked about the Veterans Affairs Minister also becoming an associate minister with D&D. We can't have a conversation on it now, but could you send the committee some feedback on how you feel those 2 recommendations have been dealt with?
Briefly,
Yeah.
we were delighted.
Yeah, but if you can
Yeah.
send it, because I'm not allowed to get an answer,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But
Exactly.
if you could send that information, I think that would be helpful
It's
to
in
this
my
study.
brief there.
Thank you.
I'll have my assistant send you some.
Thank you. And now it's time. We're going to go for the second hour, but now it's time to say thank you to the witnesses. Et nous avions avec nous.
So we had with us this morning from the Canadian Aboriginal Veterans and Serving Members Association, Mr. Richard Blackwolf, National President, and from the Veterans Association Food Bank, Ms. Mary Blackburn, Executive Director, and Mr. Tommy Wayne Benjamin, Store Clerk, Veterans Association Thrift Store. We're going to take a break and then move this meeting in camera to work on committee business. And on that note, we are going to suspend this meeting.
Thank you.